Hi, it's Jill Sprott with this week's Scrap Your Stash feature. December. It's a crazy enough month as it is without the added hysteria of daily pages to keep up with and the compulsion to keep everything forcibly merry and bright. It's a wonderful time of year, don't get me wrong, but in this week's Scrap Your Stash video, we'll slow it down a little, focusing on how to create a single layout that gets right to the heart of what the holidays are really about. I will, of course, be scrapping my stash, and 'tis the season to use supplies that exist specifically in Christmas in mind, but it's also a great time to reach for those products that seem made for holiday pages, even though they weren't technically made for holiday pages. This layout shares my Christmas wish. This is our first year without my grandmother, who passed away in April. And although I know I can't wish her back, what I do wish for is a sense of family that she taught me, a sense of family that for us was always alive and well during the holidays. This is a photo of my grandma surrounded by her family, taken in December 1970, long before I was born. This is the photo that's going to be the centerpiece of my layout. As I gathered supplies for my layout, my initial impulse was to reach for all holiday products, only holiday products, because after all, this is the perfect time of year to be using them. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this would be a great opportunity to be scrapping my stash. And so I combined some holiday products with some non-holiday oriented ones as well. The foundation of the page is this dictionary pattern paper from Crate Paper, the bundled up collection. I love ledger paper and I love text-based paper, and dictionary paper has got to be my favorite. The basic design plan for the page was to create a series of rectangles and squares spread out throughout the layout. Each of these rectangles or squares houses a different component of the layout, like accents or journaling. And so although I wasn't quite sure at the beginning what was going to fill those blocks, I spent the first few minutes just arranging different blocks here and there, working in journaling cards, a wood block from Two Peas in a Bucket that says wish, and then assorted frames, including a transparency from Crate Paper. With the basic design plan in mind, I set out starting to fill those frames. The first block that I worked on was the photo block. I really like photo mats, and maybe for some people they feel a little old school, but I think you can have a lot of fun with photo mats, and sometimes they can be really simple. For instance, this collage-based paper from Studio Calico, uh, it, you know, it it's just appealing on the eyes to begin with. There's lots of little bits to look at, but it doesn't really take much to really add some color and some energy to that background photo through this collage paper. So I'm not sure if you can really see it there, but there are some subtle pinks and blues and yellows that actually complement the existing items on the page quite well. I then turned my attention to filling the chipboard frame at the bottom right. Initially, I couldn't decide between the two different types of pattern paper that caught my eye. There was the Studio Calico paper to the left and the Crate Paper pattern paper to the right. It's a mouthful. And so I decided to use both. So I stamped and embossed both squares with the intention of creating a little hybrid square. As long as you have the right supplies, embossing is pretty easy. You just need stamps. I used October Afternoon's new stamps, a little Christmas tree, an acrylic block if you're using an acrylic stamp, embossing powder. So there you can see I have two varieties. American Crafts Zing. I have copper glitter embossing powder, and I have white embossing powder. And then, of course, you need watermark ink or embossing ink. So here I'm using Versamark ink and just repeatedly stamping that Christmas tree over it. It looks pretty invisible, but if you hold it at the right angle, you'll be able to see the stamped image appear faintly, so you can kind of work your way around it. And so I just kept stamping the Christmas tree. And then I took my embossing powder. Because it can be a little messy, this is why I keep, not calendars, sorry, catalogs around, especially at this time of year, they're not in short supply. And so I sprinkle the embossing powder over it, and then because you don't want to throw away the excess, it can be reused. I take the excess and I fold the magazine or catalog up and run the powder right down its spine back into the bottle. It's not an exact science if you're rushing like I was. Shouldn't do that, but it works. And then you take a heat tool and you hold it over the stamped and embossed images. Usually I will hold the heat tool over and you can kind of see the surface starts to change of the stamped image. That's how you'll know that it's done. It gets kind of a glossy finish. And so there you can kind of see it. This is that copper embossing powder, which is really beautiful. When you hold it to the light, it shines as if it had been glittered. The second pattern paper I used was from Studio Calico. And so again, it was still the same stamped image, the Christmas tree. This time I followed the same process, although I stamped a little more haphazardly this time. With the polka dot paper, I was stamping directly over the polka dots. Here it's just, wherever. No rhyme or reason, just lots of little Christmas trees. And so instead of using the copper embossing powder, this time I used the white embossing powder. Same approach though, that catalog underneath is really useful, but so is a piece of scratch paper. So I used that instead. And so you just crease it, put it right back in the bottle, it's all good. And then I embossed that piece of paper the exact same way I did the first one, holding it over until the surface turns a nice glossy finish. Sometimes the paper will buckle a little, but it really smooths out after it cools. Although I love this one just as is, I decided to add a little extra layer of color to it. So the neat thing about embossed surfaces is that you can mist over them and then kind of wipe the mist away. It doesn't stick really to the embossing. So here I use some gold glitter, not glitter. Here I use some gold color shine mist. It's shiny, but not glittery. So there you can see the sheen that it creates. And again, the paper will buckle slightly, but as it dries, it'll smooth itself out. So there you can see my two stamped squares. And so I waited for them just to kind of dry since one of them was misted, and then decided to put them together in a frame later on. You'll see that. While I had the old heat tool at the ready, I decided to try embossing wooden stars. I've never done this before, so you can see here my first attempt at it. To make sure that the Versamark ink or the watermark ink really covered them well, I pressed them down. And then I put some copper embossing powder over them. With the paper, it's easy to sprinkle off. These I had to be careful. My fingertips kind of wiped away the corners of one at one point, so I just sort of shook more embossing powder over it. And then I applied heat to them using my heat tool. The next area of the layout to which I turned my attention was that wood wish card from Two Peas in a Bucket. It's really sweet as is, but I wanted to add a little bit more pink to the layout, not just to pick up some of the pink that's in the photo mat, but also to add a little bit of warmth to the page. So I sprayed it with some blush color shine and dabbed away the excess. It's really beautiful. You can see that wood grain coming through. I then turned my attention back on those stamped and embossed papers. The misting dried, and so I was able to trim the papers. And I also ran a kind of a messy stitch over both of them just to unify the design and to give a little bit of texture. I then added a label from Evalicious to the photo, and I'll add the date there later. And then the journaling was to go on these Pink Paisley Sentiment Series stickers. They're really beautiful label stickers. Beautiful, I say, because I'm not sure if you can read them, but on the sides they have little notations like my family, my heart, memories. Really appropriate for the journaling that I did here on this layout. As for the journaling, it was actually meant to work in tandem with those little notations. On the one that says my family, the journaling reads, "Long before I was part of it, this family was mine in the making. This is the family that taught me about Christmas." The second one, which says together, reads, "From this one family came 5 distinct ones, but during the holidays we would all come together as one to celebrate." The third one says my heart, and that says, "Today we are no longer this family, no longer spending holidays together, but I can feel them, us, in my heart." And the final one, which says memories, says, "I never find myself wishing for actual gifts at Christmas, only thinking back to a time that was a gift in itself." As a layout nears completion, one of the things that I do is just sort of go wherever my eye takes me. For instance, here, the star on the wish card, it was cute as is, but I got the idea of adding a little bit of glitter tape behind it, which adds some sparkle to that star. And then I wrote My Family in 1970 on that label from Evalicious, and then started filling in the frames here and there. So I backed that tiny little basic gray frame with a metal star from Two Peas in a Bucket. Again, the star is not really part of any Christmas collection. It's just a clip, but you can use clips as accents that aren't necessarily holding things together on layouts. It's just purely decorative. I added some pop dots to it just to kind of make it pop off the page. This very last block with the transparency frame on it was there to house just a collection of accents related to the holidays. And they weren't just sort of haphazardly chosen. For instance, you can see a few of the flair from Two Peas in a Bucket. The ones that I've put down say holiday and love. And then I've also pulled out those glittered and embossed stars. And then I have a wreath from October Afternoon. That circle definitely represents that kind of family unity that I'm getting at or trying to get at in my journaling. And so I just filled in the layout as I went along. As a finishing touch, rounding out the mix of holiday and non-holiday products was this sweet little green button from American Crafts. So I added a little bit of threading to it, and then it became the finishing touch. So here it is, the final layout. I think this layout does December proud, but it also does my stash proud as well. It fulfills that need to work in a bunch of different holiday elements to dip into the holiday stash, but it also makes use of other things in the stash that beg to be used on holiday pages like this. Most importantly, though, what I hope truly comes across about this page is its heart. At the core of it is a story, one girl's wish for a time that feels like it slipped away. Now it's your turn. I would love to see a layout from you that combines holiday and non-holiday products. Be sure to share it in the Two Peas gallery. Thanks for joining me for this week's Scrap Your Stash.